eBusiness consulting with the top management of Glaxo, Bajaj Auto, Gillette, Indian Oil, and other top firms in India, along with eGovernance consulting from the Prime Minister of Namibia and the Chief Minister of Delhi. Professor Dhruv Nath has been guiding the students at MDI for over 18 years. He is also an angel investor and director at Lead Angels Network. His latest book, Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares, is a must read for all founders of early stage startups. Thank you, sir, for taking out time to talk to the students and innovators who are looking at pursuing an entrepreneurial opportunity. I am sure we all will have a lot to gain from this session. The stage is all yours, sir.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks a lot, and good to be with you guys. I must clarify. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So I must clarify. So Yashjeet just mentioned that I was a consultant to the Prime Minister of Namibia, and after I gave him advice, he lost the elections. And I was also a consultant to the Chief Minister of Delhi. So after I gave her advice, she died. Right? So you must realize how powerful my advice is. Therefore, you have to be a little careful before taking my advice. Yeah? Okay. So what I will do is I'll just share what I have. Just hold on. Okay, so can you see my screen? Yashit, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. Okay, so, when our young friends from MDI spoke to me and we had decided to hold this business plan competition, what I thought I'd do was I will take you through what creates a successful startup. What are the issues you need to look at? Because when you're creating your business plan, which you will submit to the jury at MDI, these are the kinds of issues you need to look at. Right? And what we've done is, Yashjeet mentioned that I've been an angel investor for the last 7 odd years, and we have actually written a book, and you can see that book there. And this, by the way, is the book. It's called Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares. So what I will share with you today is certain parts which are picked up from this book. Okay. So first of all, I'll tell you a little story. And this is a story about one startup which I have been fortunate to be associated with. And this is one of the stories in the book. And from the story, I'll try and extract and create what I would call a framework for creating successful startups. Right? So this is a startup called Squirrel. And by the way, it's not a spelling mistake. This is what the founder wanted to spell his startup as. So, if you look at squirrels, if you watch them in action in a park, what you'll notice is they obviously look for food, right? So they will look for nuts, they look for different kind of berries and so on. Some of these they eat, but some of them they save. And the reason why they save it is that they are aware that there will be days when they will not be able to get food, right? For example, in the monsoons, if it's raining very hard for days, they can't get food, and therefore they have to have stored food, saved food, right? And if you look at human beings, obviously human beings also need to save. They don't need to save food, but they need to save money. The problem is, if you look at saving, it's very, very difficult. And I'm fairly certain all those of you who are on this webinar, I'm sure you guys are unable to save, at least most of you. And why? Fundamental reason is there are too many temptations, far too many temptations, right? So you can see Yashjeet on the screen right now. The moment there is a brand new bike coming from Royal Enfield, Yashit has no option, he has to buy it. Why? Because his girlfriend insists that he buy it, right? So, that's the problem. There are far too many temptations. Suddenly there is a new restaurant in town and you guys have to go there, and you will probably spend a few hundred per head, even though you thought you would save that money. So saving is a big problem because there are far too many temptations. So how do people save? For this, I will take you back to your grandmother's time, right? And if you remember, during your grandmother's time and possibly even during your mother's time, there was something called a gullak, and you can see a gullak here, right? It's also called a piggy bank. So what happens is, let's say your grandmother spends 9 rupees 80 paise on buying some vegetables, right? So she gives the seller a 10 rupee note, and the seller gives her 20 paise back in change. That 20 paise goes into the gullak. So it is saved, right? And you can't open this, you can only break it, which means whatever goes in keeps getting saved. So, this is done every time this lady buys something. And the reason why this works very well is that it is painless. Why is it painless? Very simple. Because if you have spent 9 rupees 80 paise, then spending an extra 20 paise does not hurt you, right? Or if you spend, let's say, 23 rupees 40 paise and you save that 60 paise that you get in change, again, it doesn't hurt you, it's painless. So what Squirrel decided to do was they said, okay, we will follow this approach and we will automate this gullak, because today everything is automated, everything is app based. So Squirrel created an app, and what it does is, every time you spend money, whether it is Paytm, whether it is some other wallet, whether it is online banking, whether it is UPI, it may be through your credit card. So every time you spend money digitally, you will get an SMS. Correct? So when you get an SMS, this app has been given permission to access your SMSs. Okay? When you register with Squirrel. Now, obviously, you will also get a lot of personal SMSs. So, for example, you have Ayush on this call. He gets a personal SMS from his girlfriend, and they keep exchanging these lovey-dovey SMSs. But that Squirrel is not interested in, and you can see Yashit smiling. I'm sure he also gets similar SMS, right? So Squirrel is not interested. They don't care about your love life. Let's be very clear. What are they interested in? They're only interested in what you're spending every time. So what they do is, they know how much you spent every time. At the end of the week, Squirrel totals up your expenses and rounds it up to the nearest 100, just as the Gullak would have done. So for example, if you have spent, say, 1,770 rupees in the week, right? That extra 30 rupees to round it up to 1,800 is saved in the Squirrel app. Okay, and this is automatic, so actually it's even more powerful than the Gullak approach, where you have to remember to do it. Correct? And to try and give the saver some little returns, whatever amount is saved is normally put into something like a fixed deposit. We call that a liquid fund. Okay? And those of you who understand finance or are in a B school would understand that this is similar to a fixed deposit. Obviously, this is automatic, so it's a huge benefit. Now, they're very clear. They are targeting young adults. They are not targeting people like me. They are not targeting people who are, let's say, in the age group of 40 or 50, not middle-aged people. They are targeting young adults, which is typically guys like you. Either people who are still in college, or people who are just out of college and maybe in their first job. So typically their age group is somewhere between 18 and 30. Right? And by the way, once you've got through this webinar, it's a good idea for you to go to their website or even download their app, because you may find it useful to use Squirrel, right? So you're a potential customer. Okay, so what next? Once, see, the problem is, Nobody is going to pay Squirrel for helping them to save. But once the savers are onboarded, then Squirrel offers them other financial products, right? For example, loans, insurance, investment in mutual funds, maybe investment through stock in the stock market through a broker, etc., etc., etc. And that is where Squirrel makes its money, not by helping people to save. Okay, so that's the Squirrel story. That's not really important. What is important for you guys is, what do we take out from this story? And here I will talk about what I would call a framework for a successful startup, and I will call the framework persistent, as you can see over here. Yeah? The persistent framework for successful startups, right? And this is the framework that we have in this book. It's called Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares. In fact, it's there in the bottom right corner of this slide. So, persistent is a framework where each letter stands for something that you need to ensure for your startup to be successful. Okay, so let's take a look at each of these letters one by one. First of all, are you solving a problem? Because if you're not, nobody is going to pay you. Right? So clearly, Squirrel was solving a problem where people were unable to save. Second, do you have an earnings model? Where are you going to get your revenues from? Once again, these guys had a clear earnings model because nobody would pay them for saving, but definitely they would pay them for buying things like insurance, buying things like, or getting loans, right? So there was an earnings model. Third, size of the market. You know, if you're trying to create a startup, obviously you would like to create a startup which is growing, right? And growing more and more and more. But that growth is possible only if the market that you're operating in is large, right? Otherwise, how can you grow? So here clearly the market that they were operating was huge. It was basically middle class people in India, which is a huge segment, huge market, right? So not a problem. And you'll notice that I've taken 3 letters from the word persistent, P, E, and S, right? So let's take a look at the other 7. Scalability. Size of the market tells you how big the market is within which you operate. Scalability tells you how rapidly you can grow within that market. And why is this important? Think for a minute while I have my tea. You know, it's very, very important because you must remember you are not the only guy with the same idea. There will be lots of other people with similar ideas, and you have to grow rapidly. Otherwise, if they are able to grow faster than you, they will eat into your business and ultimately potentially kill you. All right. So to avoid, to prevent that from happening, you have to make sure you scale up rapidly. Now, how scalable is Squirrel? I must clarify something here. Any business which is purely digital is very highly scalable, and Squirrel was a completely digital business. Why? Because, I mean, there is no manual intervention at all. Everything is online, everything is automated, right? So if you have to grow rapidly, at best what you may have to do is enhance or increase the server capacity on which you're hosting your startup. That's all. So it's a very scalable startup. As compared to this, if you have something which has a large manual component, that is normally not scalable, right? For example, if you look at, say, a consulting business, which, you know, where your revenues come in only because people spend time with the client, that is not a scalable business. It can grow, but it can't grow rapidly because every time you want to increase the revenues, you've got to add manpower, you got to add infrastructure for that manpower, you got to add buildings for that manpower. That is not a scalable business. So Squirrel is a very highly scalable business because it is entirely digital. Next, risks. Obviously, every business has risks, and the biggest risk is, you know, the risk of somebody else coming in, competing with you, and potentially taking away your business and maybe killing you. And which is why you need what I call an entry barrier. Entry barrier is what? Let's say this is my business. I want to make sure that no competitor can enter my business and eat into my customers, my market share. Okay, so I want to create a barrier which prevents my competitor from entering my business and competing with me. That's an entry barrier. And incidentally, if you have an innovative solution which is tough to copy, obviously that's a very good entry barrier. So, for example, if you have a patent, that's a great entry barrier, right? In the case of Squirrel, we realized that the entry barrier actually was not very great, right? Because potentially anybody can get into this business. Over time, the trust and the brand becomes a bit of an entry barrier, but still it is not significant. So, if you look at Squirrel, one place where they are not very strong is that they do not have a very strong entry barrier, right? So, which means they need to scale up very rapidly to prevent competitors from getting in. And that's why scalability of the business becomes extremely important. And this incidentally is generally true. The entry barrier usually builds up over time. Okay, so we've seen 7 of these. Let's take the last 3. What do you do if the market is crowded? Now, this applies very much to Squirrel. Very, very much. Because, they are doing what? They are offering things like loans. So it's a kind of marketplace for loans. It's a marketplace for insurance products. It's a marketplace for investing in mutual fund. But that's a hugely crowded market. You look at ET Money, they're doing exactly the same thing. You look at Paytm Money, they're doing exactly the same thing. You look at Policy Bazaar, they are selling you insurance products. Look at Paisa Bazaar, you look at Bank Bazaar, look at Zerodha. I mean, there are so many giants, and these are huge guys, right? So it's a very, very crowded market, very crowded. And please remember, and this incidentally is not only true for your business plan, which you're creating for this competition. If you're actually creating a business, please remember, never get into a business which is crowded, and especially a business which is crowded with huge guys, because they will have a lot more money than you, and therefore they'll be able to kill you. So what did Squirrel do? And this is the fascinating part. When you have a market which is crowded, you try and identify a subset of that market which is large enough but is not crowded, right? And I'll call that a niche, a large enough niche. What did Squirrel do? You remember I told you they attacked whom? Well, attacked is the wrong word. They targeted whom? They targeted youngsters. You see, if they were targeting guys in the age group of 40 to 50 or 50 to 60, they are already doing, they're already taking loans, they're already buying insurance through some agent or the other, and therefore Squirrel cannot break in. It's impossible to break in. But if you look at college students, they haven't yet started doing this, right? If you look at guys in their first job, people in their early 20s or mid 20s, they haven't yet started doing this. So Squirrel only targeted young people. Please remember, the amounts involved were small because they would only take small loans or take, small amounts of insurance. But as they grew and they got comfortable with Squirrel, they continued with Squirrel, and therefore the amounts also kept increasing. So they were very smart. They identified a large niche which was not crowded, which was the target market of youngsters, not middle-aged and older people. Okay, so identify a niche if the market is crowded. What is the final proof? You may have done phenomenal planning, brilliant planning, etc., etc., etc. But ultimately, the one question everybody is going to ask, boss, dhanda kahan hai? Where is the money? Are you actually getting customers? Are these customers actually giving you money? Are you getting revenues? Are the revenues increasing month on month on month, quarter on quarter? That is traction, right? And fortunately, Squirrel was able to get very solid traction. As of today, they've got about 4 lakh customers, of which about 2 lakh are active. And I think they make 3 years within starting, from the start, they have been doing a revenue of approximately 10 lakhs per month, and it is growing very rapidly. In fact, even during COVID times, it grew significantly. And then there is a very, very important thing right at the end, which is the team, right? The team starts with the founders, and it's very important because you have a great business plan, you have the wrong founders, sorry, it won't work. Fortunately, here they were great founders. In fact, the CEO is a guy who was a senior vice president at Axis Bank, and he quit his job at the age of 40 and he started this along with two other co-founders who again were fairly senior. So very strong team. What I also want to spend a little time on is, I've talked about the persistent framework, which I have just shown you, right? So each of these problem, earnings, model, risk, size of the market. I mean, this is our persistent framework. But persistent is also an English word. And that's important because persistent means what? When you have a startup, you'll have lots of ups and downs, probably more downs than ups. But you have to persist, you have to keep persevering, you have to keep on and on and on. You can't give up. That is the most important part of the framework, persistent. Fair enough? So that concludes my first part, which is about the framework for successful startups. What I will do now is I will just switch to the second part. Just hold on. Yeah, so now this is part 2, which is not really required for the business plan, but it is required if you are actually genuinely planning to put that business plan into action, or if you already have a startup, right? Because then you may want funding, and here I will talk about funding. Once again, this is picked up from the book. So I will not talk about getting loans or debt funding, but what I will talk about is equity funding, which basically means you have your startup, you have your company, getting somebody to give you money in exchange for shares in your company, right? So somebody buying shares in your startup. The first place that you would normally go to, right, is your own sources, right? And that's what I call friends and family. So amounts that you have saved, or your chacha, or your mama, father, grandfather, whatever, right? That's normally the first place where you get funding. And the important thing here is that these people know you. And because they know you, hopefully they trust you. Of course, you could have a situation that they know you and therefore they don't trust you. Let's keep that aside, right? So they know you, they trust you, and therefore they are willing to give you money without asking you too many questions. So they will not ask you for your 3-year business projections. They will not ask you for a detailed Excel sheet. They will not say, boss, show me your balance sheet. No, they will not ask you all these questions because they trust you, right? You give them some idea about the business and they'll put in money. So they will put in money at a very, very early stage without too many questions, but the amounts they put in are typically small. Next, you come into what we call angel investors, right? Now, angel investors are the first external investors in your company, so they don't know you, right? And because they don't know you, they need much more details about your company to be convinced. So they will ask for your balance sheet. They will ask for whatever account statements you have. They will want to meet your customers. They would want to see your product definitely, right? And they will spend a lot of time with you trying to understand you, trying to understand why you're running this business, how good you are going to be as a CEO, as a founder, and so on. And typically they will look for some proof, that is some traction, right? Go back to my persistent framework, they will look for some traction. And the traction that they look for would be, how many customers do you have? Is it growing month on month? Are you getting revenue growth month on month, and so on? So that's angel investors. But once they are convinced, they will normally put in more money than family and friends. So family and friends in all will not put in anything more than about between 5 lakhs and 25 lakhs. But angels can put in much, much more. Would go up to something like 3 crores, 3.5 crores total. So we need to understand a couple of things now. I have talked about the persistent framework, right? And I've said the persistent framework is important to create a successful startup. So that's what the founder needs to look for. But what do angels look for? Actually, it's exactly the same, isn't it? Because both the founder and the angels want exactly the same thing. They want a company that is growing, they want a company that is successful, they want a company which hopefully at some stage makes a profit, they want a company where the entry barrier is high and therefore competition cannot eat into your market share. They want an innovative solution, they want a large market size scalable solution. So they want exactly the same thing, right? So angels also look for uh, the persistent framework. So please remember that anytime you're making a pitch or a presentation to angel investors or any investors for that matter, please remember these are the things that they will look for. Now, I want to mention something about angel investing that is called angel networks. And you need to understand what these are and why they started. See, earlier, let's say in the year 2005 or before that, you only had a few rich angels, right? So you had people like Ratan Tata, you had people like Narayan Murthy, you had people like Nandan Nilekani, Anand Mahindra, okay? So, you know, the real rich guys. Now, these people had their own teams, right? So they had their own analysts, lawyers, accountants, and they would be able to review startups for possible angel investment. They did not need any support. Now, what has happened is that you have something that we call Aam Aadmi angels, right? No connection with the Aam Aadmi party, by the way. Aam Aadmi angel means a common man angel investor. So, for example, I am a professor, and before I was a professor, I was a salaried person, and I'm an Aam Aadmi angel investor. I cannot invest crores like these rich guys used to, but I can put in 5 lakhs, I can put in 6 lakhs, right? So I'm an Aam Aadmi angel. However, the Aam Aadmi angel, and there are lots of them by the way, there are about 25 to 30,000 Aam Aadmi angels today in the country. They are not super rich, therefore they do not have access to their own accountants or analysts or lawyers. So they need support to be able to evaluate companies in detail. Who provides this support? The angel network, right? And one of these angel networks is the angel network that I represent. So I am a part of this network, which is called Lead Angels Network, right? And incidentally, the co-author of my book is Sushanto Mitra, who is the CEO of Lead Angels Network. Just to explain to you, so when you apply for angel funding, what do you need to do? Okay, what you need to do is, first of all, you will approach an angel network. You will not approach individual angels, right? And there are about 6 to 7 large angel networks. Lead Angels is one of them. Then you have guys like Indian Angel Network, which is the oldest. Then you have things like Chennai Angels, Hyderabad Angels, and so on, right? So you have about 7, 8 such large networks. So you will approach an angel network. You'll go to their website, or if you want funding from Lead Angels, you can approach me. So what the angel network will then do is they will shortlist these guys. So typically, you know, a lot of the applications we get for investing, for funding, unfortunately, many of them cannot be funded. And therefore, we shortlist. So from the 100, 150 odd applications that we get every month we get about 100 to 150 applications. We shortlist it down to about 3 applications, right? These 3 we believe are worth taking forward. Then what happens? These are these founders are then told, okay, boss, come and make a pitch to our members, and our members are angel investors. So most angel networks will have anywhere from 100 or beyond angel investors as members. So we at Lead Angels have about 200, right? So they make a pitch, and right now, of course, all pitches are virtual, but earlier they used to be physical within a conference room. Now, once they make a pitch to the members, then the members decide, look, this is of interest, this is not of interest, right? So wherever the startup is of interest, 1 or 2 members get together and say, okay, now we will evaluate this in far greater detail. We will talk to their customers, we will study their business model, we'll look at their projections, we will look at their assumptions, and so on and so forth. Once they do that, they say, okay, we find it is worth investing in. So then the other investors in the angel network are invited, and those who are interested then take a call to invest. And then we therefore take commitments and we create a kind of MOU, which is a legal document called a term sheet. And the term sheet is signed between the potential investors and the founders. But that's not the end. After this, the accountants and the lawyers get into action, right? So they will look at whether the balance sheet has been filed or not, right? Whether the profit and loss account has been filed with the Ministry of Company Affairs. And there are many other such reports that you have to file. Have these been filed? Any agreements that these guys have, are they in order, right? So all kinds of due diligence gets done, at the end of which the shareholder agreement is signed and you get the funding. Okay, and this process normally takes about 3 to 4 months, normally. So that's angel funding. Then we come to venture capitalists, right? And I'm sure you guys have heard the term. So this is the next stage, and there is a fundamental difference between angels and venture capitalists, right? And that fundamental difference is that VCs put in other people's money, angels put in their own money. Okay? So what do angels do? They decide on a startup and they say, I'm going to put money into this. That's their own money. What the VC does is, he says, I will create a fund. And in this fund, I will raise 500 crores. And I will raise this fund money from multiple investors. So each of those other investors will put money into my fund. Then I will decide where this money has to be invested, which startups it has to go into, whether it has to go into Byju's or whether it has to go into Flipkart or into Oyo Rooms or Ola Cabs or whatever, right? So the VC puts in not his own money, but the money that the investor has given him, whereas the angel puts in his own money. And between putting in your own money and somebody else's money, there is a fundamental difference, right? The VCs cannot take the kind of risks that the angel can. Agreed? Which is why the VCs normally invest at a later stage compared to angels, when the startup has proved itself, where the startup has far more traction, it is far more stable, and they will ask many more questions, right? So the angel investor also looks at the accounting statements, but so the VCs look at it in far more detail, right? And they will spend far more time evaluating it, but at the end of this, they will normally put in more money. Okay, so that's your next stage, which is VCs. What do VCs look for? I don't think you need to think too much about this. It's again the same, except that it's in more detail. So they want to see far more traction. They want to see a bigger size of the market. They want to see a scalable business. They want to see a strong entry barrier, etc., right? So it's exactly the same persistent thing. So please remember, whenever you're going in for funding, make sure that when you make your pitch, when you make your presentation to any investor, it doesn't matter who, you take care of these things in your startup. Then we have something called a strategic investor. Interesting again. Angel investors and VCs are what we call financial investors, which means ultimately they put in money for maybe 4 years, maybe 5 years, and hopefully they, at the end of those 4 or 5 years, they want to sell their shares to some other investor, hopefully at a solid profit, and make money in the process. But ultimately they want to exit. They are not permanent investors. Compared to that, let us look at the example of ICICI Bank investing in a microfinance startup. I assume you people know what microfinance is. See, microfinance is what? Companies which lend to women small amounts, very small amounts in the rural village environment. And they normally lend to groups of women. And it's a very large area, very, very large area. And it's a growing area. It's a huge market, very large market. Now, ICICI Bank is investing in this microfinance startup not to exit. No, they are investing because they find that they are able to give loans to people who want to buy cars, people who want to buy homes, they want to buy, maybe they want the money to invest for their business. But they find microfinance is a good area to get into. They cannot get in directly, so they will invest in the microfinance company because that is a very good extension to their current business. So now they give loans not only for cars and homes, but also for microfinance, and that part of the business is managed by the microfinance company. So it becomes a kind of subsidiary of ICICI Bank, and that is what I call a strategic investor, where the interest of ICICI Bank as the strategic investor is not to exit, but to make this an extension of their current business. And normally, strategic investors will take very large shareholding, very large stakes in your company, at least 30%, and in many cases more. So, just to summarize, I mentioned the amount of investment between friends and family, angels and VCs or strategic investors grows. The level of risk gets lower and lower, and incidentally, the valuation at which they buy the shares also goes higher and higher. Some terms which our industry keeps throwing around, which is you know angel investing typically is between 50 lakhs and about 3.5 crores. And you must remember, it's very fashionable to talk in dollars, even though you may be getting your entire investment purely in rupees, and your entire business may be in rupees. But at a party, if you say I've raised 3.5 crores, nahi chalega, it falls flat. But when you say, oh, I've raised, 500,000, it's that's saying something, right? So people talk in millions. Then you have something called a pre-Series A, which is about $500,000 to $1 million. Series A is 1 to 3, Series B 3 to 5, Series C 5 to 10. But and of course beyond. But there's no hard and fast rule. I mean, you can call something a Series C and you may be raising 3 million. That's okay. You will not be put into jail. Don't worry. Right? These are just terms that are thrown around by our industry. Okay, before I conclude, I think this is important. Lots and lots of founders and lots of potential founders have asked me this question, and quite frankly, nobody has a clear answer to this. Nobody, right? So, if you are an MBA, you would know that normally to value a company, you will use something called the DCF approach, which is discounted cash flows. Now, for those of you who are not MBAs, I'll just explain this very, very simply. Essentially, what you're doing in very, very highly simplified terms, you are trying to look at future profits over the next 3 to 5 years, right? What is the profit you'll get in next year, the year after that, the year after that, and then you apply a formula to that, the profits over the next 3 years, and that formula then gives you today's valuation. Okay, that is the DCF approach. The problem is, if you have a steady, stable company like Hindustan Lever or Nestle or Larsen and Toubro or Reliance, these guys have a solid past, and using that past, you can forecast the future. So you can say, look, Hindustan Lever will keep growing its profits by about maybe 10 to 14% every year because they've been doing that for the past 50 years. But what about a startup? The problem is your startup has no past or very little past, or in many cases, the startup has no revenue at all, and definitely it has no profit. So, if it has no past and no revenue, how do you forecast the next 3 years? You can't. Plus, you must remember many startups change direction very often. We call that pivoting. And if the business model changes, your projections can change dramatically. So formulae cannot be applied to any startup, and that's something that all people in the startup environment agree on, whether it is investors or whether it is founders. Therefore, how do you actually value when you can't use standard valuation methods? So usually what you do is you use thumb rules, right? And there are multiple thumb rules. I'll just take you through the most common thumb rule that we use. By the way, you can also compare the startup that you're investing in with other similar startups in similar industries, right? That's one thumb rule. But the problem is, very often, this information, which is what valuation was that startup invested in, is not public knowledge. It is known only to a few, only the investors who invested in that startup. So how do you find that out? That is the problem. But the most common thing that we use is what I call the stage of the startup. So typically, if you are at the concept level with a successful pilot, some level of proof, you normally get somewhere between 3 and 6 crores, right? If you have some history of revenues, you will get about 6 to 10 crores. Of course, if you have a significant history of revenues, 12 to 15 crores. Normally, at the first stage, the angel investing stage, you will not get a valuation which is higher than 12 to 15 crores. In fact, most often, it will be somewhere between 4 and about 10 crores. But I must tell you before I end, the actual practice. Actual practice is it's a demand and supply situation, right? It depends on who's more desperate, the investor or the founder. And usually the way it happens is these guys sit together in a coffee shop, maybe CCD or barista or whatever. And on the one side you have the investors, on the other side you have the other side of the table you have the founders, right? Or it could be in a bar and you have beer mugs in front. So the founder says, "Sir, my valuation is, I have all this. I have a very strong entry barrier, huge market size, etc. My valuation should be 12 crores." The investor will say, "Ho hi nahi sakta. It can only be 5 crores, not more, not a penny more." And then they will negotiate, they will haggle, they will keep drinking coffee, more coffee. Incidentally, the investor pays for the coffee. The startup founder does not, because we know that the founders do not have money. That is why they are raising money, right? And at the end, they will shake hands on maybe something like 6 or 7 crores, right? So ultimately, it's a negotiation game. I just want to mention one last thing before I close. So suppose you are given a valuation which is far below what you think you should get. Should you accept it? I would say, if you need the money to grow rapidly, or to build a product, or to build a brand and therefore grow rapidly, please take the money. Otherwise, somebody else will take that money and you will lose out. He will kill you, right? So if you need the money, take it, use it to grow, you'll get a far better valuation next time. So if you need the money, take it. Maybe don't take 5 crores, maybe take 1 crore, maybe take 75 lakhs, but take it. Don't avoid growing simply because you say, no, this valuation is too low, I will not take this kind of money, right? So on that note, I will end this session. And by the way, in case you are interested, this is the link to the book in case you guys want. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. Yeah. So now, you guys, Yashjeet, Ayush, and gang, you have any questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for such an enlightening session.
One more sip of tea.
Yes, sir. So I'll just ask you whatever the questions the participants have put in. So, sir, the first question is, the most obvious problem that one faces is of creating value proposition for both customers and investors. Can you please put in some light and emphasis on this point as to how to identify opportunity and create value?
It is too general a question. Too general. It is something like, how do you become healthy? So I don't know what kind of answer I can give to this. Basically, what you have to do, I think what you have to do is you have to look around and you have to see any obvious problem that people are facing. Any obvious problem. Okay. So I'll give you one very simple example. There is a founder who came to me, and I think he's a graduate from one of the IIMs. I forget which one, right? So he came to me. He says, "Sir, I noticed a problem, and the problem is that lots and lots of people have diet plans, but in many cases they seem to work. In many cases they don't work." So I did some research, and I figured out that look, how this works on you actually depends on your DNA. So what I realized was, if we can first do a DNA test and then prescribe a diet for you, it will be far more effective. It's a brilliant idea, right? What he did was he essentially tried to look at what kind of, looked around him, looked at the world and saw the kind of problems people were facing. I'll give you one more example. There is one example called Uno Finance, which actually is mentioned in this book. It's a story in this book. It's a very bright guy called Tushar Agarwal. So he once, one of his friends, his father had to go to hospital for some major surgery, and they didn't have money, and they didn't have enough insurance cover. बहुत problem होगी, they had to pick up money from here and there, beg, borrow, steal, whatever. So he realized that, companies give loans for things like buying a TV, buying a refrigerator, buying a car, buying a home. But companies do not give loans for NBFCs, and banks do not give loans for hospitalization. He says that's a huge opportunity. So let me get into this business, and that's what he did. Right? So he's created Uno Finance, which gives loans for hospitalization. He's doing very, very well. So I think the fundamental issue is you have to look around yourself and see what kind of problems people are facing, identify one of them, then start applying your persistent model. Boss, is the market size large enough? Okay. Is it something which you can scale up rapidly? That's how you will typically do this. So look around you, keep your eyes open, or look at other startups, look at other founders and see whether you can do those better, more scalable, lower cost, higher value, right? So you basically have to look around you and identify problems.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is, sir, as you have mentioned that one learns from his failures as much as he learns from his success. So, sir, the person wants to know what failures does a serial entrepreneur gain from a failed startup and how to prepare himself for the next venture.
Oh, great, wonderful. So you're right. So I didn't say that here, but it is there in the book. Right? So I'll give you one simple example. Right? Um, I personally invested in a startup called Quaco. And incidentally, Quaco was started by two very good guys, very bright guys from MDI. They were your seniors, right? So they passed out, I think, somewhere around the year 2010. And what they did was, if you look at Make My Trip, so Make My Trip is in the travel industry and they will help you in booking hotels. These guys said there are a lot of, small resorts which are what you call boutique resorts, which are not typical five-star hotels, which are only, 8 rooms, 10 rooms, chota sa, tucked away in the mountains somewhere or tucked away in a beach somewhere. Nobody even knows about them, right? These are what we will promote, and we will do something similar to Make My Trip, right? So we will promote these, and initially they did very well, right? There are two reasons why finally they couldn't succeed. They didn't succeed, they closed down. Reason number one is, I keep talking of the persistent framework, size of the market. They realized ultimately that they were not able to find, there were probably not more than about 1,500 such boutique small resorts, right? And that's not a large enough market size. So they had about 800 of them in their database. They said, now we can't grow anymore. We can't grow too much. We are stagnating. So one of the fundamental premises of our persistent framework, they had flouted, not a large enough market size. Secondly, I keep talking about entry barrier. They did something very smart. They went to the owner of these small resorts and they said, boss, we will promote your resort. In Make My Trip, you will be there at number 50 or 60. You will not even be seen. Right? We will promote them. We will send our customers emails promoting you. So those owners were very happy. They said, great, we will give you a good discount. So they had a discount, and therefore the prices they charged were lower than the prices charged on Make My Trip. But the problem is discounts can never be a long-term entry barrier. Because Make My Trip said, hang on, if they can do this, I can do the same, and I don't need to make a profit. I'll give a bigger discount. So they killed these guys. Yeah. So the problem is discounting is not an entry barrier. They did not actually have a solid entry barrier. So, you know, the important thing here is when you have a failed startup, you have to look at why it failed. And I've given you two reasons why this guy failed. Most of the time, it is because of reasons such as these, right? Uh, you have not looked at an entry barrier, a solid entry barrier. You have not looked at the size of the market, or in some cases, the customer you thought would buy your product does not want to buy your product, right? I think in fact, if you ask me as investors, we are very happy to invest in founders who have a failed startup, provided we find that they have learned from it. Because if they say, yes, sir, this is the mistake I made and that is why it didn't grow. But now in my current startup, I have taken care of this. We are very happy. So please remember, failing is not a problem. Failing is, I mean, not to be scared of. You will fail. Lots of people fail. Many, many people fail. Mukesh Ambani has failed in many things, right? So failing is, Tata have failed in many cases. But once you fail, please remember you must learn from that and apply that learning to your next uh, startup. Otherwise, you're just wasting time, you're just wasting money.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Sir, the next question is, how does one check if the valuation of his company is in line with the industry and the region, and to what extent should he be flexible in tweaking the valuation?
So I just mentioned this, in fact, in the last part. So I think this question may have come earlier. First of all, it is not region dependent. I mean, in India, as long as you're doing it in India, it's the same. It doesn't matter which state you're in. Yes, if you're looking at companies which are based in the US or Canada, typically valuations there tend to be higher. But let's talk about companies in India. Um, it is very difficult to figure out whether your valuation is, higher or lower compared to what other guys are doing. I think one very good way is you have to be networked to peers, right? Be networked to peers. It's always a good idea to have one or two mentors who can give you this advice. But ultimately, like I told you, ultimately it is a negotiation game. And I would say, like I said in the end, if the investor, let's say, okay, let's take an example. So let's say you want to raise 3 crores and you think that your valuation should be 20 crores. And the investor says, sorry, at your stage of the business, I cannot give you a valuation of more than 7 crores. Now, at 7 crores, if you have, sorry, if you have raised 3 crores at a post money valuation of 7 crores, then you have already given away 40% of your equity, right? 3 upon 7, right? That's about 40%, more than 40%. It's very silly. Don't do that. But you need the money to grow. So my strong suggestion is, if you need the money to grow, take the money, but don't take 3 crores. Maybe take 1 crore. If he's giving you a valuation of only 7, maybe take 1 crore, then you're only giving away 15% of your equity, which is fine. Use that to grow, then raise a next round where you can hopefully get a higher valuation. So that is the way you should normally proceed.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the next question is, if a startup's business plan passes your evaluation criteria, are there still some things or factors that affect your investment decision? The factors that make or break a deal. Are there some factors like that also?
Yeah, see, I told you, in fact, I just mentioned that when I talked about the funding part. So after the entire business plan, we are happy with the business, happy with your customers, happy with the growth, happy with the projections. But I mean, something has gone wrong with your accounting. So let us say you have not filed your returns. And if you not file your returns consistently, then we may not invest because we don't want to get stuck in a startup which keeps getting notices from the Ministry of Company Affairs, right? Or I remember one case where the founder had taken a loan, the startup had taken a loan of about 3 crores, and he never told us. So the business was great, but when we did the due diligence, and this normally comes up during the accounting due diligence phase, we realized that they actually had a loan of 3 crores on their books. We said, hang on, this is too much of a risk. We cannot invest in this kind of company. So Even after we approve your business plan, yes, we would look at due diligence, which is basically your agreements, your, the fact that you have met government norms, you followed government rules, etc., etc., etc. All that becomes very important. It's not easy to get money. Please remember.
Yes.
Nobody says, boss, ye paisa le, jo karna kar. Nobody says that.
Yes, sir. So the next question is, there is a set of expectations from an investor when he invests in a startup, which may not always be in line with the vision of the startup. How should a startup go about with such a situation?
I think it's a very good question. Unfortunately, you guys are not on this thing. Otherwise, normally all good questions I will give you chocolates, but here I can't because you guys are on YouTube, right? I would say very, very, very strongly. The money you take is very important, but who you take it from is equally important, if not more important. Okay? If you want to create a successful startup, you need time. Very important. You need time, right? You need time. You need to build your startup. You need to build your brand. You need to build your product. You cannot say in 1 year's time, I'm suddenly going to reach 5 crores and I'm going to give you lots of profits and a dividend. You can't say that, right? Fortunately, most investors, the angel investors and VC, they understand this and they're willing to wait. In fact, typically, the waiting period, people say, look, I put in this money, I've forgotten about it, and I will look at returns 4 or 5 years down the line, right? Right now, I'm not interested. However, people have come to me and said, look, sir, I want money, but I'm not getting money from angel investors. However, there is one guy who is willing to give me 20 lakhs and he will take a stake in my company. So I asked them, who is this guy? Sir, it's a shopkeeper, a guy who has a wholesale business in Chandni Chowk or whatever, Chavdi Bazaar. So I said, hang on, this guy is most likely a lala. He has the money, but the moment you take the money from him, every month, every quarter, he's going to sit your head and demand returns. He's going to make your life hell. You want to grow your company, you want to run your company, this fellow will not let you. So don't take money from him. Even if it helps you, don't take it from him. Only take it from people where their vision and their long-term vision aligns with yours. Don't take it from people who look for short-term returns. That's the biggest mistake a lot of founders make. So as long as you do that, you are safe. There is no problem because in my experience, angel investors, VCs, realize it takes time and they are therefore aligned with your thinking.
Sure, sir. So, sir, there is this one last question. Should startups be looking more and more at incubators and accelerator programs as they can benefit from their ecosystems and advice?
Yeah, actually, these are very good ideas because I think the biggest advantage of accelerators, incubators is that you learn from multiple people, multiple mentors, and I think most important, you learn from your peers. Because if you're in an incubator, you will typically be in an incubator where you may have 20, 25 other startups, right? You're facing a problem. The other guy next to you has faced the same problem 6 months earlier. You can figure out from him how he solved it, right? Somebody asked a question about valuation. You can ask those guys, look, your startup is similar to mine. What is the valuation you got your money at? So learning from peers as well as learning from mentors becomes extremely important. So yes, I agree. It's a very good thing to do.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for such an insightful session and giving us a deep dive into the fundamentals of raising funds for a startup. The session definitely has lifted the fog around raising capital, and I'm sure the viewers had a lot of takeaways from this session. We thank you for your time and wish you a very, very warm and wonderful evening ahead. Thank you
Great.
very much, sir.
Thanks, Yashit. Thanks, MDI guys, and thanks everybody who's been on the on this webinar. I hope it helped. Thank you.